Hi, loves. So, I wanted to spend a little time today around the question of why do you or I say yes when we mean no? I have three thoughts about that I'd love to share with you, and maybe they will help with some clarity and give you something to think about something other than self criticism or self doubt. So, I think the biggest reason why a lot of us, especially women, say yes when we mean no is that we just actually don't know yet what our yes and our no is, and we don't know what that feels like in our body. We don't have a compass yet. We are, for the most part, culturally and socially raised to not have a compass. We certainly aren't modeled to have a deep feminine compass that responds in the moment and not from concept. Meaning that what it is for you or I to understand what our yes is and what our no is requires actually quite an authentic amount of living in the moment, quite an authentic amount of being able to feel ourselves and hear ourselves well, trust ourselves, and then be willing to give voice to ourselves in any moment. Your true yes and your true no, these aren't conceptual realities. It's not personality opinions that we're talking about. You know, when we are wondering about consent about all sorts of things, or how we're choosing to structure our lives, what we're saying that we'll allow or that we won't allow. These The truth of that is not going to come from a rigid understanding of what we like and what we don't like, what we think is right and what we think is wrong. It will always come from a deep knowing, like a response in the moment to whatever it is. So, the reason a lot of us say yes when we mean no is just that we haven't been taught and we haven't cultivated yet the depth of intimacy with ourselves, the way that our bodies signal us, the way that our hearts signal us, the way our own timing functions, our own needs. We haven't had the time and space to cultivate that yet, or haven't chosen to take it, and therefore we just don't having a living compass yet for the constantly moving true north that it is. Yes, no, I'm available, I'm not available, I want this, I don't want that. It is always changing. So there's a befriending and an alliance with your own instinct, your own in the moment untamed impulse towards what you're drawn to, and the ability to move towards that, the willingness, and what you're repulsed away from, and the allowance of that. So, what could you do about that? Well, the thing I think that could help a little bit with that is just to soften around all that you don't know, to take a minute to, which I have to do all the time, to acknowledge that true north, yes and no, are an evolution. And sometimes we're going to get it right away, and sometimes we're not. And to soften around the whole process of yes and no. Like it or not, we are in a discovery journey for the rest of our lives. And the only way to make a lot of the discoveries, especially around what's really for us and what's really not for us, is to err in many different directions, get the feedback, harvest the wisdom, and continue to refine our own knowing, to continue to refine our own sense of how we tell ourselves what's a yes or what's a no. So, what can you do? First of all, you can stop acting like you're supposed to know yes and no all the time, that you're supposed to know what's right all the time. You're not. We do our best. And the more we can cultivate it, the safer we'll be and the happier we'll be. But we were also made for this journey. We were made for this life journey, which includes the the slipping to one side or the other, the I just said yes and I meant no, or I just said no, but what I really yearned for that. And it can be uncomfortable and sometimes devastating. There's a spectrum, right, of the consequences of saying yes when you mean no. But don't ever underestimate your ability, how you were created to be with life, to regenerate and to Do not get broken by these things. Don't hold this pressure like you're supposed to figure it all out and know everything. Do your best and then treat yourself to the time and space of harvest. So if you just keep going, either judging yourself, coming into, I feel like a lot of women come into a place of feeling like they're just always a doormat, or they just don't know themselves well, or they always make shitty decisions, whatever it is. These kind of crystallized perceptions of themselves based on past mistakes or not knowing themselves well enough to prevent trouble or to prevent heartbreak or whatever it is, right? That we've made bad choices sometimes, we believe, and we take that on as a sign of character, rather than giving yourself a little mercy. Most of us are going through this without any major models, without any, like, we are kind of inventing this as we go right now because there's been such an interruption in female wisdom. So, although it's still living, we are in the process of uncovering and emerging and learning it again, learning it in these times, in this way, in your moment, in your life. So, what I would encourage you to do is to also take time sometimes to consider the times that you have said yes when you meant no, especially, and just from the perspective of what can I harvest from that to feed myself now in this moment, really take a look. How were you telling yourself no? How were you not listening? What was the signal in you that was saying no that you can see now? Because whatever situation it is has played out for you, and now you can see, oh yeah, that was a no. And if you can start to familiarize yourself through experience with your own languaging, how do you speak to yourself? How does yes show up for you? How does no show up for you? Then it's going to become more and more accessible to you in the moment and in future moments. And that is the process. It will be a lifelong journey because you're unfolding and so is life. So I invite you to do that. I invite you to turn a merciful, gentle eye toward your past choices that don't feel coherent with your values and ask yourself, what can I harvest from that? So that you're taking it forward into a richer future rather than holding yourself back in a perception of a mistake or something that you could have done better. Neither one of those things exist. The second thing I would say about why do we often say yes when we mean no is that we have a deep, permanent, ancient need to have certain sacred needs met. And a lot of them are not acknowledged by our culture or our religions, because woman has been so absent, literally women have been so absent from the creation and the evolution of social and cultural and religious architectures. There's just a huge gap for all those things are in their beautiful ways. There's a big absence, there's a big invisibility there, and that invisibility has to do with what are the sacred needs that are incarnate and inherent and innate in a woman's body, in a woman's being, in a woman's subtle wiring. And that is a lot of what we are running up against when we notice ourselves in patterns of constantly saying yes when we mean no, saying yes to things that we don't really want, settling for things, compromising, hanging on to things that don't serve us, that we know aren't healthy for us. Take a minute to pull back from all your judgments on that, like, well, I'm so needy, or I'm so codependent, or I'm so wounded from childhood. Take a minute to pull back on that and just consider. You have many sacred needs. Sacred meaning your being will never stop trying to get them met because they are holy and they are part of the fullness of you. You have so many of them, and they are not recognized by our cultures at large. And therefore, you're in a dialogue with you're in a dialogue where there's a language trying to be spoken through your being that isn't really spoken often by the world around you. And what that's going to do is put you into situations where you are saying yes to things that aren't a full yes, because you're being informed and kind of powered, unconsciously or otherwise, by these deeper needs that do have truth in them. The situation you might be in, the choices you might be making, the compromises you might be making don't have the fullness of your truth in them. But the core need, that seed of yearning in you, is trying to bring you to something amazing. It's trying to bring you to your fullness, to your complete unfolding. So, I mean, how does that look? A bunch of ways, right? What's a sacred need? One of them is to be seen. So in how many ways do we grasp to be seen? Do we try hard to make ourselves seen and seen in a certain light? And how exhausting does that become? And this desire, this deep need to be cherished, and in how many ways do we find ourselves kind of wiggling around and contorting around relationships, just trying to figure out what shape can I take so that you'll cherish me, so that you'll value what I am here. I would encourage you to honor yourself and try to find the deeper pulse underneath of what's bringing you into these situations or to these choices that don't reflect your value and that don't reflect what's a true yes or a true no for you. If you can come to the sacred need, like notice when you are not in coherency, when your choices are not reflecting your values and they're not reflecting your self-respect, or they're not reflecting what is just basically love and care for yourself, or what you want for yourself. When you notice that your choices are not reflective of that, see if you can part the kind of thick veils of all the way you might analyze that or try to fix it or try to understand it or try to process it. Just take a minute, just see if you can part all that and just drop deep and ask, what am I trying to get met here? What am I so starving for? What am I so thirsty for? Like, I feel like I'm going to die if I don't get it. And it's not, I'm going to die. It's like your soul, your heart, your deep feminine essence is draining, depleting, is starving, is thirsty. See if you can come to that level of intimacy with yourself, because that gives you a place to begin that has potential, right? Once you name what your sacred need is, you can allow that sacred need to start informing your choices. So you can kind of pull out of all the confusion of what do I want, what do I not want? Is this person for me? Is this person not for me? Should I do this job or that job? Like, just who knows, right? That stuff is usually really complex and confusing. What will be simpler, maybe not always easy, but simpler, is to distill it back down into your being, honor the sacred need that's living there, and start to see where it's trying to take you. Start to move from that place of need in an honoring way, right? In a way that has the potential to get it met. So a lot of times why we say yes when we're meaning no is that we have these deep needs that are not going to go away. You're never going to fix it by therapy, not a sacred need. It's in your soul. And either you're going to die a little bit on that level, or you're going to keep burning until you've answered that call and until you've allowed it to inform the life that you're living and the people who are around you and the way that you're being loved and the way that you're loving. So, sacred need. See if you can set up your own intimate, private, honoring dialogue with the sacred needs that you're aware of living in you. And it might hurt because you're going to have to feel where you're starving. You're going to have to feel where you're lonely inside of all these relationships and where you're kind of not soul fulfilled even in the midst of your purpose. This kind of deep feminine thirst will guide you to something. It will guide you to radiance, it'll guide you to your fullness. But you have to be the one to set up that intimacy and to ask the question and to turn toward yourself, and then to continue turning toward yourself and see, you'll start to see all the places you're compromising and that you're saying yes when you mean no. And you will start to be able to inquire and get curious about how else could you meet that need, so that you're not going into this place of collapsing and squashing and diminishing your own needs. You're coming into a place of honoring and bringing them into fruition so that they can call forth the nourishment and the life that you were meant to have and that you most long for and that will most be of service to our world. Right? So, why you say yes when you mean no? One reason is that you and I are still learning ourselves. We're still learning what yes and no means, looks like, feels like, and it's not, we never get to land on it. We always have to live inside of that question. We're developing a compass. The other is that you're acting from a place of trying to get sacred needs met. And until you address them, you're going to continue to kind of breach your own containment, reach out of what's good for you, reach out towards things that aren't really reaching towards you, all these things. The third and final thing I'll note that I think is often an undercurrent of why we say yes when we mean no is that we're rushing. It's kind of simple. Your yes and your no are probably not going to come like that. I mean, we can do our best to cultivate intimacy with ourselves, to know ourselves well, to listen deeply, and still, any expectation you have that you're going to know yes and you're going to know no as soon as somebody wants you to give that answer, see if you can shed that. It's not realistic. These questions will land in your being. The possibility of a relationship, the possibility of a life change, the possibility of whatever, whatever it is, will land in you, and it's probably going to need a little time to flower because there's so much to you. You are not a linear being. You are a multi-layered being, and you're layered, your heart, your womb, your sexuality, your loving, your sensitivity, your power, your dreams, your fears. I mean, the spirit that surrounds you, your connection to the unseen, however that's happening for you. A real coherent yes or a real coherent no often requires a little bit of time, especially if it's a big question. And a lot of us actually rush that process. We rush because we have false urgencies. We've allowed culture and the pace of things to inform us, to structure our way of being with ourselves in a way that does not serve the unfoldment of our own inner knowing. And what's really interesting is that if you do start to look, you will start to find that a lot of those urgencies are false. They're false. We put more pressure on ourselves often than the world is putting on us. So one thing I would say is, when you're faced with a question that matters and you don't know, then don't know. I mean, what you can do in some ways most to serve yourself in this question of when do I say yes, when do I say no, how do I know what's right, is to become really tight friends with the mystery in the form of the statement, I don't know. Really simple, and just get comfy using it every time it actually applies. Don't try to know something that you don't know yet. Don't try to know something that you don't have enough information to make a decision about yet. Don't rush it. Sure, there are times and places where you're going to have to make a decision or there's going to be a timing on it, but you'd be surprised how many times it's false urgency that's pushing us into decisions. And false urgency can come from things like, but I need to get my sacred needs met. Like, I need to be held by somebody like right now. Or I need to fix my financial situation right now. There's false urgency is that it's that there may be a call, there may be a need, but the urgency and the panic and the intensity that surrounds it is what is false. You coming into a state of deeper confidence and grounding and deeper knowing and deeper intimacy with yourself is what is going to give you safe passage, right? And I know that it's not easy. I know that it's not. There is a lot moving in the world. There is a lot of urgency that we're responding to. We've never, well, I can't say that, but it's important for us to take very good care of ourselves right now. Be very careful about what you let in and what you don't in terms of giving yourself enough time and space out of urgency so that the actions and the choices that you're making are coming from magnetism and they're coming from confidence, meaning like a feminine confidence, which is like, I know myself well enough and I'm right here enough and I've got myself. I've got this. I feel what my sacred need is. I know what I need. And I know I'm committed that that need will be met. But I'm going to hold that need because now I've named it. And I don't know what yes or no is right now. But I'm going to listen deeply. And I'm going to understand where my compass is and just do my best to follow it. And, accept the mercy of creation in that process. And I'm going to befriend the mystery. I'm living in a mystery. All this bullshit pressure to know everything all the time and make the right decisions all the time is ridiculous and totally crazy making. We live in a mystery. We don't know most things. And yet in our dialogues, in our decision making, in our lives at large, we are constantly trying to know what we don't know. So befriend the mystery. She's the truth. And in that, when you do allow yourself to say, like, I don't know, the question then comes, well, what do I know? It's a way of opening to true revelation and true knowing. When you acknowledge that what you're not clear about yet. And that'll open the door to saying yes when you really mean yes, saying no when you really mean no, and becoming the deepest ally you could possibly wish for. Nobody will ever feel, know, have the intimacy with you that you can. And therefore no one can ever foster the kind of alliance that you can with yourself and with the mystery that lives inside of you and with how you're going to hold the unfolding of you. Because emerging woman, emerging life is never going to be captured. She's never going to be named. You are never going to figure it out. You're going to have to live this and do it in a good way to yourself, as best as you can. So, those are some of my thoughts on why you may be saying yes when you mean no, because that's why I say yes when I mean no. So that's my offering. And I hope this lands in a good place in your heart and that it stirs some remembrance in you and some gentleness in you with yourself and a yearning and a pointing towards deeper intimacy with your alliance with the mystery, with your alliance with your own true North Star that will never leave you and is just asking for you to turn toward her and continue to listen and cultivate and refine your relationship to her guidance. So, blessed be, here's to saying yes when we mean yes, no when we mean no, and I don't know when that's actually what's true, and I don't know again when that's still what's true. I love you.